Well, hey you guys, welcome back to the salon. I'm finally back doing another video. Sorry it takes me so long, like in between these, but I have the other main channel, 13 o'clock, and we put a lot of content up over there. So sometimes I don't get, time to do these because these are a little bit more, you know, time intensive, I guess, because I tend to do longer videos with like more of a kind of complicated topic. So, yeah, we're finally getting back to one of my series that I started a while back. And we've actually reached the first milestone on this long ass journey through my favorite horror movies of every year of my lifetime. So we're on 1982. So this actually marks 10 years. So we're like at a decade from my birth. So that's kind of, like I said, that's kind of a milestone, I guess. And is kind of also serving as a spot about a fifth of the way through this entire project, which is kind of daunting, actually. This is going to take like a really long time to do, but I don't know. I'm having a good time, so it's all right. So 1982, another great year, obviously. Even though I didn't have quite as many favorites to sort through this time around, because if you remember, I think it was 1981, like I had a bajillion, and I had a whole bunch of honorable mentions and stuff like that. I will say that even though I didn't have as many this time, a couple of the movies that are in my top five this year are actually some of my favorite movies, like ever, not just of 1982. So there's that. So before I get to the main five, as usual, I'd like to give a little bit of a brief shout out to a handful of honorable mentions. First of which is Basket Case, the very scuzzy New York Frank Henenlotter classic. I love that movie. Also gonna give a shout out to The Entity, the sort of paranormal extravaganza starring Barbara Hershey that was based on the allegedly real haunting of Doris Bither, which is actually like kind of a fascinating case if you want to look into it. Also, one that doesn't really get a lot of love. This is kind of an Australian movie. It's kind of a psychological horror, like slow burn type of thing, and it's called Next of Kin. I really like that one as well, and I kind of feel like more people should see it, so I thought I should put it as an honorable mention on the list. Also, gotta give some love to Q, the Winged Serpent, the Larry Cohen movie, which is kind of nutty, but I actually love it anyway. And lastly, the very, very weird, very bizarre British alien movie Extro, which again is one I don't see a lot of people talking about. And if you're into like weird ass 80s alien movies, please see this because there's a lot of what the fuckery in there and it's like pretty entertaining. So let's get on with the show in no particular order except alphabetical. So yeah, god damn it, I love Creepshow. I swear I must have seen it at least 100 times at this point, probably more. Every time it was on cable when I was a kid, I would watch it, and and I have it also. I own it, so I've seen it a bunch of times subsequently. I've seen it so many times, in fact, that I'm pretty sure I have large chunks of the dialogue memorized, if not the entire film. So, I mean, I love horror anthologies. It's one of my go-to subgenres. And honestly, this is easily one of the best horror anthologies, if not the best horror anthology ever made. I mean, you can't do much better than directed by George Romero, written by Stephen King, effects by Tom Savini, and kind of based around the whole tone and aesthetic of the classic old like EC horror comics. I mean, everything about this movie is just like absolute perfection. It looks fantastic, like the theme of it, the look of it is just all really ties together really well, and it looks great. It's really stylized. It's really gory. It's really fun. It has like creepy moments, like it has like actually some scary, creepy stuff going on. It's also really funny, like in a dark way. And honestly, it just never fails to entertain the absolute shit out of me, like whenever I watch it, which is pretty often. I mean, all five of the stories are good, including the wraparound story, which is kind of like a sixth story, I guess. The wraparound story actually has Stephen King's son, Joe Hill, who is obviously now like a big horror author in his own right, but he was a kid in this, and also has Tom Atkins being like a huge asshole. Like it's delicious. He'll be appearing later on in this list, spoiler alert. But yeah, so all of the stories are completely solid, and I'm honestly not really sure if I'd be able to pick a favorite segment, because I don't know, like, it depends on the day. Like, every one of the stories has been a favorite of mine at one stage or another. Like I said, if you ask me today, I might give you one answer. If you ask me tomorrow, I might give you a different answer. I'm not really sure. On most of the time, though, I'd probably single out the first story, which is called Father's Day. I really love the interactions between the characters, particularly the kind of two main ladies, like Sylvia and Bedelia Grantham. Like, those are the characters. The performances are really, really good there, and I just love them. And also, I love the makeup on the reanimated corpse of their father, Nathan. It's just, like, really gooey, and it looks fucking great. And here's something that I feel like I once knew, but I had forgotten about. It's this little fun fact here. Although Nathan, the patriarch, was actually played by the actor John Lormer, like, in the flashback sequences when he's still alive. Like, when he's in his zombified form, like, crawling out of the grave, say he wants his cake and all that, he was actually played by none other than John Amplas, who played the title character in the George Romero movie Martin from 1977. And I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. This segment also has Ed Harris doing a really, really dorky disco dance, which is adorable and awesome, and I fucking love it. So that's another thing that kind of contributes to my love of this particular segment. But, you know, I mean, obviously the rest of the segments are just as outstanding as that one. I mean, Stephen King, who is, you know, he shows up in some of his movies sometimes, usually like as a bit part, and he's not an actor, let's be charitable about that, and I'm sure he would be the first to admit that as well. But he's actually great in his segment, which is the second one, The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill. He just kind of plays this backwoods yokel, like, getting colonized by a fast-growing space weed, like, and his performance is, like, over the top, but it's a comic book movie, so it really does fit the tone. So I think he did, like, a really good job there. And, like, some of the stuff in this is just, I mean, just him, like, wiping the stuff on his thing, going, meteor shit, you know what I mean? It's just, me and my brother used to, like, repeat that to ourselves, like, all the time. And it's just the stuff of him with, like, going to the university, like, trying to sell the meteors, like, $200 for a broken meteor. Like, I love, like, all of his flashbacks are so fucking funny. Also, the segment with Leslie Nielsen, who is great, like, playing a really, like, a villain in this one, and he, like, buries his you know, wife and her lover, like, up to their necks, like, at the beach, so they drown, and then, like, you know, they come back as kind of sea zombies, like, to get him. And just the performances there are fucking great. That's, like, Ted Danson plays the wife's lover, and so he's kind of, like, buried up to his neck. It's just, like, that's a great segment too. And like I said, Leslie Nielsen is fucking great in it. He's always good as a villain. I feel like people that grew up and saw him a little bit later always kind of perceive him as being, like, a funny guy because he was in, you know, the Airplane movies and all that. But he actually started out, like, when he was, like, in his earlier career, like, almost always playing villains. So this was kind of like a return to form for him, and he's really, really fucking good at it. Also, the Crate, which is also a really great segment, has Hal Holbrook in it, Adrienne Barbeau, like, playing his horrible bitch of a wife. Although she's not as much of a bitch. Yes, she's very shrill. But some of the stuff she, like, yells at him about, she probably had a right to yell at him about. You know what I mean? So my girl's like, she's not that bad. But yeah, like, the poor, like, henpecked husband, like, feeding her to Fluffy, like, in the crate. That's fucking great with a big monster. And the segment at the end, they're creeping up on you with E.G. Marshall, and, you know, him being, like, this real rich douchebag living in this, you know, apartment that's, like, completely sterile because he's, like, a germaphobe and all this other stuff, and then just being, like, inundated with cockroaches. Oh my god, when I was a kid, because I still hate cockroaches, I grew up in Florida and we have them everywhere, and I was always, like, really grossed out by them. Still am, although not as bad as it used to be. But that segment, I almost couldn't watch it. Like, it stressed me out so much because, like I said, this was 1982. That wasn't no CGI. Those were all real cockroaches. Like, crawling all over the fucking place. They had a cockroach wrangler. It was a whole, because I've seen, like, all the behind the scenes shit, like, on an old, like, Tom Savini documentary that I had about him, about his effects. And yeah, they were showing, like, all the fucking, and when all the cockroaches come busting out of E.G. Marshall at the end, like, you could hear all the background crew going, ah, like, they're all, like, flipping out. It was great. But yeah, I mean, just everything about this movie is just exquisitely realized. I'm going to say that. It just has this really, really perfect balance between horror and dark comedy, and the look of it is just great. It just has those comic book style, those transitions, like with the panels and those super saturated colors, and it looks fantastic, and it still looks fantastic to this day. The movie is just a winner all around, and I never, ever, ever get tired of watching it. So Halloween 3, very famously shit on back in 1982 because it was a completely different story than the first two Halloween movies and didn't have Michael Myers in it, didn't have anything to do with Michael Myers or Haddonfield or anything. But I'm kind of glad that Halloween 3 Season of the Witch has, gotten a critical and audience reassessment over the years and now is, a beloved cult classic because it really is a great movie. So this was actually written by John Carpenter and Deborah Hill, obviously, directed by Tommy Lee Wallace. Now, this was actually supposed to be, because, they asked John Carpenter to do another Halloween movie, and he's like, I don't really want to do another Halloween movie, you know what I mean? It's like he kind of said whatever he wanted to say. But he's like, I tell you what, I'll do one if you let me do a completely different story going forward. Like, we want this to be... they wanted there to be a change of direction. Like, a new Halloween film will come out every October, but they'll all be different from each other. So it'll be more like an anthology series than like a single continuing story. Needless to say, this idea got scrapped when horror fans were like, where's Michael Myers? What the fuck is this bullshit? You know what I mean? And they got really mad. And so, when Halloween 4 came along, they brought back Michael Myers and they just continued on with that story, which is still fucking going in 2023, which is crazy to think about. Now, I can see why people were upset at the time. Like, I was pretty young. I was only 10 when this came out, so I didn't see it until a year or two later. So I can't really speak to if I would have been upset about it or not. But I will say, I think the anthology concept totally would have worked had people been more open to it at the time. But, it's like people. It's like, what are you going to do, So for those who haven't seen it, like I said, Halloween 3 has nothing to do with Michael Myers, nothing to do with any of the characters. It's a completely standalone story. And it actually kind of starts out as something like a murder mystery, a little bit. Like, there's a couple guys who get killed by some sort of mysterious looking men in suits. And then as the story goes on, the daughter of one of the victims, as well as this kind of suspicious doctor, who is played by Tom Atkins, who is also in Creepshow, they kind of uncover this bizarre conspiracy involving Halloween masks made by this very shady corporation called Silver Shamrock Novelties. And yes, if you've seen the movie, I know you now have the jingle stuck in your head, so you're welcome for that. Turns out that the owner of the company, whose name is Connell Cochran, has fitted each of the masks. There's 3 different kinds, like a pumpkin, a witch, and a skull. And inside each of the masks is this little microchip that contains a tiny bit of Stonehenge. Just roll with it. Just roll with it. So what he's trying to do is he's trying to bring back those good old Samhain traditions of child sacrifice by having kids wear the masks and then having the masks interact with this TV commercial that activates the Stonehenge bits that are inside the mask, basically making the kids' brains dissolve into like a mush of bugs and snakes. Because, why not? Why not? If you can do that, why wouldn't you? I'm just saying. Oh, and also, the employees of Silver Shamrock are all androids, so there's that too. So I'm going to say, like, the great thing, what I love about this movie is just how unapologetically weird the premise is and how dark the ending is. I kind of like that it went there. I mean, because basically, spoiler alert, it's implied that Connell Cochran's plan succeeds because Tom Atkins is seen at the end of the film screaming into the phone for the station manager to turn off, like, the commercial that's, it's not playing on any of the other ones, but this last network is still playing it. And so he's like, turn it off, and he's like flipping out. But it would seem that by the time, he calls and like the commercial's already played, like the damage has already been done. So like all the kids are already dead, we're led to assume. So, you got pagan child murder, you got robot henchmen, you got that fucking earworm of a commercial jingle. That kind of just makes this like a really memorable movie to me. And it's always one of my go-to movies for around Halloween because it just has this really good nostalgic like Halloween atmosphere to it that really kind of puts you in the mood, So I have to admit that in general, I'm not usually the biggest fan of like big Hollywood type spectacle movies. There's a lot of, exceptions to that, but generally I'm not. And especially in regards to horror movies, I don't usually like big Hollywood horror movies. They're usually just kind of mediocre at best. But I will say that Poltergeist is actually one of the few exceptions to that rule. Although it is obviously a big budget, very special effects laden extravaganza that was actually produced by Steven Spielberg. Some say directed by Steven Spielberg. But, really it was directed by Tobe Hooper, who, obviously did Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But there's just something so enchanting about this kind of terrifying movie. It scared the shit out of me the first time I saw it when I was 10 years old. Because you have like this really likable, middle-class, normal family who just become the target of, kid stealing spirits, essentially, without, like, through no fault of their own, you know what I mean? So I feel like at this point, probably everyone and their mom, like, knows the plot of Poltergeist at this point, but, it's, if you don't, because like I said, some people are younger and haven't got around to seeing all of these older movies yet. It actually deals with the Freeling family, who are a married couple. They have 3 kids, and they kind of live in this sort of generic, nice, middle-class California suburb of the type that was pretty solidly, like, aspirational, for a large part of the American populace at the time that this movie was made. So you kind of have at the beginning, it's kind of a brief period getting to know the family, including the fact that the dad, Stephen, who's played by Craig T. Nelson, works for the company that developed and built the neighborhood that him and his wife and kids now live in. And they develop other ones like in the surrounding area as well, which kind of factors into the plot later on. Now, the Freelings, it's implied, have actually lived in this house for a while with no problems. But it seems that the paranormal activity seems to be kicked off when they start digging a pool in their backyard. At least, like I said, that was what I took from it. Now, at first, the mom, Diane, who's played by Jo Beth Williams, she thinks the whole thing is just neat as hell because, she turns her back and all the dining room chairs, like, rearrange themselves, like, all on top of the table. It's like, wow, that's pretty fucking cool, you know what I mean? Like, in a second, you know what I mean? Which is actually pretty fucking cool if that really did happen. And there's this whole thing, too, where there's kind of this mysterious invisible force in the kitchen, and she puts the daughter, Carol Ann, like, on the floor, and it, like, pulls her across the floor. Carol Ann, of course, played by Heather O'Rourke, who sadly died at the age of 12 from an intestinal disorder during the making of the 3rd film in this franchise, which was not good. The second one was actually pretty good. I like Poltergeist 2 quite a lot. The 3rd one was not great. I didn't really love the change of setting. There was some good ideas in there, but it seemed like they cheaped out on it. And I don't know. I have a hard time watching it nowadays because I know that Heather O'Rourke, she didn't look super healthy during the filming of it, and I know that she died during the filming of it, and so some of the scenes, especially toward the end, you can tell that it's like a body double. So it's like always kind of gives me the ick, like, to watch it, I guess. So yeah, so even though these kind of cool, like, poltergeisty kind of manifestations at first, like with the rearranging chairs and stuff, seems like pretty awesome, but it doesn't take too long before stuff starts getting a lot more sinister. For example, the son, Robbie, who's played by Oliver Robbins, he has this horrifying clown doll. I don't know why your parents would buy you something like this, but okay. I'm sure I'm not the first person to say it. It's like, why the fuck do you have that? That's terrifying. I don't want that sitting in my room looking at me, and he doesn't either. He's like throwing the jacket over and stuff like that. It's like, it's fucking looking at me. I'm like, I feel you, bro. I would do that too. So, but at one point, like, this doll, it comes to life and tries to strangle him, and its face is all fucking horrible, and that used to scare the shit out of me when I was a kid. Oh, and he also gets partially eaten by, like, this tree outside his window, like, during this bad storm. Also, and probably, like, even worse than that, there's some unknown people, the TV people, as Carol Ann calls them. She's been talking to them, apparently, like, via the television static, and they basically, like, snatch her away to the other side, like the land of the dead or whatever. So at that point, like, the Freelings have to call up this team of paranormal investigators, which includes the iconic character, the psychic Tangina, who's played by Zelda Rubinstein, and they have to try and get Carol Ann back from, beyond the veil or whatever. I mean, everything about this movie just works. I mean, the family are all, very realistic, very engaging. Carol Ann in particular is just so cute and like so adorable that when she's put in danger, the stakes feel really, really high. Like you really get invested, like emotionally invested, like this cute little girl like got snatched away by ghosts, you know what I mean? I will say the manifestations of the supernatural in the movie are way over the top. And, and I watched it again recently, probably about 6 months ago, after having not seen it for a couple of years. And I did note that. I was like, yeah, it's a little over the top for me, but somehow still it never seems unnecessary or it never seems excessive. I think it's because the movie has enough of a sense of humor to kind of keep it grounded. It's not really making fun of the manifestations, but it's almost kind of like it knows that it's showing you a spectacle, and it's just kind of like, we know, it's like, let's just go along for the ride type of thing. So I think this kind of thing was very common in the 80s, and I think people just kind of accepted it. It's like, yeah, it's way over the top, but that's okay. It's just, like I said, it's like a ride. I especially like the way that the family, like, after a while, like, by the time the paranormal investigators get there, I love the way they become, like, really inured and, like, just completely deadpan about, like, the haunting. Like, the investigators get there, and they're talking around the table or whatever, and, something pretty minor happens. It's just kind of like the light goes or something like that, and the investigators are like, what the fuck? And they're all, like, freaking out, and the family are just, like, all blah about it because it happens all the time. I mean, the mom just says, oh, there'll be another one in a couple seconds. They always travel in pairs. And then the guy like tries to take a picture and he's like, gotta be quicker than that around here. Like, they're just really like, that's like really funny to me. Because one of the funniest things, and I don't know why this is, and I was just thinking about this the other day, but one of the funniest things to me is when a movie is like has really like absurd stuff happening in it, but people are like really deadpan or like underreacting to it for some reason. That's very funny to me. So I really like that aspect of it, that they just got so used to it that they're like, whatevs, you know what I mean? And it's like, that's just really funny. Now I will say that and this is one of the reasons why a lot of people said, Steven Spielberg actually directed this, because the movie does feel very Spielbergian in its tone. So Tobe Hooper kind of gets shunted to the side a lot. I think maybe a lot of people that don't think about it too much probably think this is a Steven Spielberg movie. He did produce it, and by all accounts he was on the set quite often. But, there's conflicting reports. Like, a lot of the actors and crew that worked on it said, no, Tobe Hooper was the director. He was there every day. And, yeah, Spielberg was there, too, like, putting in his input. But this was a Tobe Hooper movie. And I will note that even though the movie is very Spielbergian, Tobe Hooper's fingerprints are all over this shit, too. Especially during the more horror scenes, like the scary scenes. Because there are a lot of really scary scenes in this. Especially if you're a little kid. Because, like I said, I saw this, I think, in the theater or as soon as it came to cable. So I was only like 10 or 11 when I saw this. And some of this stuff in here like scared the absolute shit out of me, including one of my favorite scenes, which is one of the investigators, like the guy with the glasses, when he goes into the kitchen like to get something out of the fridge, and the steak like crawls across the counter, and then like all this goo starts like coming out, and then like he runs in the bathroom and like pulls the flesh of his face off and shit like that. I was like, holy shit, that used to scare the crap out of me as a little kid. The movie was actually rated PG. Now I think initially it got an R, but I don't think they cut anything out of it. But Spielberg and Hooper, they kind of appealed to the MPAA and eventually got it talked down to a PG. Like I said, I don't think they cut anything out of it. If you know different, like, please let me know. The movie did seem to be aimed toward families, not kids necessarily, but it did seem to be aimed toward families. But I will say that, man, 80s family movies didn't really fuck around. They would absolutely had no compunction at all about showing like an 8-year-old kid getting swallowed by a monster tree, or rotted corpses popping out of the ground and like falling out of their coffins and shit, like a chicken leg covered with maggots, and the whole clown doll trying to strangle a kid and all this other kind of shit. They would absolutely show that in a family movie, and that's probably why we're all so messed up to this day. Another thing I actually love about Poltergeist is the structure of it. It does a really good job of making you think that you've seen the climax and it's like the end now, when Carol Ann gets rescued from the ghost dimension and everything's supposedly okay. All right, we can relax now and shit like that. But then the movie just like completely pulls the rug out from underneath you. The paranormal shitstorm just ramps up to motherfucking 11, and then it ends with like the entire house getting sucked into a vortex. You know what I mean? Which you can't get more over the top than that. You know what I mean? The ghosts are just like, shoop, we're taking it by. So it's just kind of like that. that. And the family has to go flee to a Holiday Inn. And I love that last scene where they close the door of the hotel room. There's like a beat of silence. Then it opens and they roll the TV out of the fucking... I love that. It's like a punchline of like a really long joke. And it's just like perfect. I love it. So yeah, this is a great movie. It's still a great movie. It holds up really well. So it just goes to show that even big budget blockbusters sometimes do horror right. So this is easily one of Dario Argento's best films. And I think it's his best giallo after Deep Red. I still believe Deep Red, or Profondo Rosso if you prefer, is his best giallo, but I think this is his second best one. I think Tenebrae is also probably the most meta movie he ever did, because it seemed to be based on criticisms that he had been receiving in the media throughout the 70s about the amount of violence toward women that was featured in his work, because that's kind of a prominent theme in this movie. So in Tenebrae, you have Anthony Franciosa playing a very successful American horror writer, murder mystery writer named Peter Neal. And he's doing a book tour in Rome, and while he's on the media tour, he's kind of fielding all these real uncomfortable questions from reporters about the perceived misogyny, like in his novels, right? Now, these questions only start getting more heated after it becomes clear that there's a serial killer running around in Rome who's using the murders in Peter Neal's latest book, which is called Tenebrae, as inspiration for his own murders. So, just like a true giallo movie, there's kind of a little bit of a rogues gallery of potential suspects, like for who the murderer is. Oh, maybe it's Peter's seemingly unstable ex-wife who followed him to Rome, like without his knowledge. Or maybe it's this journalist named Cristiano Berti, who seems to have this real unhealthy obsession with Peter's novels. As it turns out, spoiler alert, if you have not seen this movie, which is very, very old, so don't get on my case about it. So, you know what I mean? If you don't want to like hear spoilers and stuff like that, then you can like skip ahead. But, it's hard for me to talk about like particularly older movies and stuff like that without spoiling some shit that happens. So, it turns out that Cristiano Berti, the journalist, was the killer at first, but then he gets murdered, and then after his murder, the duties get taken over by Peter Neal himself, our main character, who actually did end up killing Berti. So what ends up happening there, this is very Dario Argento, like very much, repressed sexual trauma, like making you a murderer later on. That's a big thing in giallo movies in general, but particularly in Dario Argento's movie, he goes back to that theme again and again. So it turns out that doing all this stuff and like talking about all of Berti's murders kind of shook loose a repressed memory in Peter Neal's mind of being sexually humiliated by this beautiful woman on a beach, like when he was young. And there's like a big thing about these red high-heeled shoes. It's very fetishistic, you know what I mean? Now, the fact that this beautiful woman that sexually humiliated him is played by quite a well-known Italian trans actress named Eva Robbins, that kind of adds this sexual ambiguity that turns up, like I said, a lot in giallo films in general and in Dario Argento's movies in particular. There's also kind of a recurring theme in Tenebrae of doubling or mirroring of the characters. Like every character has its double, like its counterpart. And there's a lot of thematic stuff going on with that as well. Because Dario Argento is, I guess he's playing with kind of like duality and identity and things like that. And that theme kind of ends up resonating with the plot device of there being two killers. And if you're interested in like all of the intellectual themes behind Tenebrae and all of other Dario Argento's other movies, there's a great book. It's quite old at this point by Maitland McDonough. And it's called Broken Mirrors, Broken Minds. And it's great. And it delves really like in intellectual like film history kind of way about all the themes, the sexual themes, all the kind of stuff that's in his work. And it's really, really interesting. And she writes like a really interesting chapter about Tenebrae, about all this stuff going on in there. But yeah, the kills in this too, pretty brutal. And it's almost as though Dario Argento was kind of like doubling down on the criticisms of misogyny that he'd always received. Like at one point there's a lesbian couple and they get pretty savagely butchered at one point. And in a very famous scene, Peter's ex-wife has her arm very graphically chopped off, and then the stump just kind of like sprays this bright red blood, like all of these white walls. And I mean, the scene is like, it's grotesque, but it's also like kind of beautiful. Like a lot of his kills were like, he was really into that operatic, like over the top, gorgeous kind of shit. You know what I mean? Even though it's like horrific, but yeah, it's a fantastic. It's very understandably like a really famous scene. But I will say that the men get killed too, not in quite as splashy ways as the women do. But a lot of men get killed in this too. Like Cristiano Berti, for example, like who was the first killer, he gets hacked up with an axe. And Peter's agent, whose name is Bulmer, he's actually played by John Saxon, which is pretty awesome. He gets stabbed to death like in broad daylight, like in the middle of this public square or whatever. So as I mentioned, I mean, Tenebrae, one of the best giallo movies ever made. It's very gory, it's very complex, kind of thematically rich, very thematically subversive, I guess. And I feel like if you're a fan of Italian horror, then yeah, you really need to see this movie because it's one of the best ones. Okay, and this one, probably the most obvious pick on the list. One of my favorite movies of all time, of any genre. This, I feel like, is John Carpenter's magnum opus. Easily his best film. I like it better than all of his other ones, even Halloween. This movie, it just gets better and better and better, like every single time I watch it. I always find new things in it. And I feel like everything about it is just exquisite, you know what I mean? I love the bleak setting. I love the richness of the characterization, like the interaction between the characters. I love this slow, steady ratcheting, like of the suspense. I love the score. It's very elegant. It's very simple. And of course, the special effects are fucking incredible. Now, much like Halloween 3, when The Thing was first released, at the box office, it very famously got its ass kicked by both Poltergeist, which I talked about earlier, and E.T. the Extraterrestrial. And bizarrely, critical response to The Thing was overwhelmingly negative. And some of the words that were tossed around by various reviewers at the time were excessive, nihilistic, sterile, boring, which, okay, moronic, junk. Basically, this is what I didn't really see hardly any contemporary good reviews of The Thing, which blows my ever-loving mind. That is fucking crazy to me. Now, John Carpenter, who made the film because because of his love for the 1951 The Thing from Another World, which I guess is kind of like the predecessor of this. It's based on the same novella. It was based on the same novella, which is John W. Campbell's Who Goes There? That came out in 1938. But they're a lot different. You know what I mean? This does get called a remake of The Thing from Another World, which it kind of is, but there's so much different about it. I don't know if I'd call it a remake or not. It's kind of in the same ballpark, but it's not exactly the same. There's a lot of differences. So poor John Carpenter, he makes this movie and had a really bad career backlash because of its critical and commercial failure in 1982. He was kicked off his next project, which was he was supposed to direct Firestarter, the Stephen King adaptation, which came out in 1984. Although I will note that he did end up directing another Stephen King adaptation, Christine, in 1983, which actually we'll see how it goes, but it might turn up on the next list because I think that is a really, really underrated film that not a lot of people talk about, but I really liked his adaptation of Christine. Also, John Carpenter got bought out of his multiple movie contract at Universal that he had signed like after the success of Halloween and whatnot. So thankfully, finally, critics as well as audiences eventually pulled their heads out of their asses and realized that The Thing was a fucking masterpiece. I mean, come on. And now, rightly so, it's considered one of the best horror films ever made and very frequently appears in the top 5 of any reputable list. I mean, I'm just going to say right here, if you see a list of like best horror movies of all time and The Thing isn't in the top 5, that is not a list that you want to pay any attention to because that is a bullshit list. Same with The Shining. I feel like those two movies should probably be in the top 5. Some of the other ones, and probably The Exorcist too, now that I'm thinking about it. But it's just kind of like, I know that it's kind of like boring. It's like, oh my god, it's the same 5 movies, but that's because they're fucking good. They are the best ones. So you know what I mean? Everyone's just recognizing that. So that's what I'm saying. But yeah, if you see a list that doesn't have The Thing in the top 5, then that is a bullshit list. You don't need to pay any attention to that. They don't know what they're talking about. Now, so to be honest, I mean, I love everything about The Thing. It has that isolated Antarctic setting that gives it this really, really like palpable claustrophobia. All the male characters, they live in these really close quarters, again, which is very claustrophobic. And the tension in this is just off the charts. And I'm going to say, like, I really, really like, because I think some people thought this movie was like maybe slow or it took a long time to get going. But I really, really like that slow rollout of the plot. And really, like, at the beginning of the movie, I swear to God, the opening sequence of the thing has to be like one of the best opening sequences in film history. You have the Norwegian guy in the helicopter. They don't know he's Norwegian at the time, but we know he's Norwegian. So he's like coming in the helicopter, like shooting at the dog, which, you start out with that movie and you're like, what the fuck is going on? So why is this guy trying to kill a dog that's like running across the fucking ice or whatever? And then like you have all our heroes like at the American base, and they just like, they don't know what the fuck he's doing and they don't know what he's saying, and they end up just like shooting him because, he shoots one of them in the leg. It's like, and who the fuck tries to kill a dog anyway? I mean, man, that is such a great, compelling setup. It just like pulls you right in. You're like, what the fuck is going on here? You know what I mean? And then like the fact that the dog turns out not to be a dog at all is just kind of like a perfect resolution and like carrying on from that initial incident. It's just like so great. I mean, Kurt Russell, obviously I have to bring up Kurt Russell, or Crussell as me and Tom like to call him. He is also cool as fuck in this film, as he usually is in most of his films. He just seems like a cool as fuck guy. And I think he does a really great job like conveying the just crushing paranoia that would set in if you were trapped in the middle of nowhere with an alien who could replicate whoever it wanted. I feel like if this was an organism that really existed, which maybe it does in the universe somewhere, isn't that a terrifying thought? I mean, I think that would be the scariest monster ever. And I don't think that the human race would be able to defeat it, because how could you? You know what I mean? It just seems like, and I think they realize that in the movie too, like the import of, man, if this thing gets off of this base and like gets out, and that's the end of the line for the human race, and it probably would be. So I think that was really like well handled. I mean, and I'm gonna say it's not just Kurt Russell, like the whole ensemble cast is like fucking fantastic here. Everybody is just like spot on in their roles. Every single person in this is great. Obviously, I would also be remiss if I didn't point out the extraordinary effects work by Rob Bottin, who did some shit in this movie that, in my opinion, has still never been topped. Including all of the kind of melded and stretching people like that they find, Norris's head like pulling itself off his body and then growing spider legs, and Windows being like, you gotta be fucking kidding me. Which again, he was underreacting, and that's very, very funny to me. Also that great sequence where that big toothy mouth like opens up in Norris's chest and cuts off Dr. Copper's arms, which was actually done by a guy who didn't have arms. You know what I mean? So it's like, that was really good thinking. I mean, there's just like great practical effects. They still look fucking amazing more than 40 years later. So I'm just kind of like, you know what? Suck it, CGI. You know what I mean? I don't want to say that. I don't mind CGI if it's used judiciously, but practical effects are generally better. They don't date the same way that CGI does. And, like I said, you see something like The Thing, which is all practical effects, or like I mentioned earlier, like Creepshow with all the real cockroaches, that's real. It was all really there, and it still looks great. It still looks great to this day. Whereas if you had done that with the digital effects, if you had digital effects of the day, it would look like shit now, because, the digital effects are so much better than they used to be, but you're going to be able to tell when that is. Practical effects, like I said, way better because the shit's really there. That's all I'm saying. So yeah, I mean, The Thing, obviously a stone cold classic. And I did enjoy the original Thing from Another World from 1951, even though it's, like I said, a lot different than this movie. So I don't even know if I'd call it a remake. I guess technically maybe it is, but it's so different that I don't know if I'd call it that. And I actually didn't even mind the 2011 prequel, which I actually thought was pretty good. This here is actually the OG. And, any burgeoning horror fan, if you're maybe like a younger horror fan and you haven't got around to some of the older stuff yet, I mean, you really need to see this one. It's kind of like, it's kind of like if you're coming up as a horror fan, this is like part of your homework. I don't want to say that like to sound like it's going to be like tedious or anything like that, because it's a great fucking movie, but this is definitely one that you absolutely need to see. So 10 years down, 41 years to go. So yeah. Thank you for watching. Please join me next time for 1983. I haven't looked at the list of horror movies from 19. I have a couple ideas of ones I want to put on there, but we'll have to see when the time comes. I'm not really sure when that'll be. It might be a month from now. It might be 2 months from now. We'll see, because I have some other like series that I want to kind of continue with on this channel. But yeah, remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment. I'm trying to get 1,000 subscribers on this channel, and I'm almost there, so I can monetize it. But, so if you haven't subscribed yet and you watch my stuff over on 13 o'clock or on Crime Immemorial or anything like that, then please consider subscribing to this as well. And I will see you guys again on the next one. Bye.